The morning of September 21st, 1953 started like any other at K-14 Air Base in Kimpo, South Korea. Ground crews were running pre-flight checks. Radar operators were at their stations. Pilots were drinking coffee. Nobody was expecting anything unusual. Then the radar blipped. A single aircraft was inbound. No formation. No escort. Flying at low altitude directly toward the American base. It was not on any scheduled flight plan. The tower scrambled an alert. Intercept procedures were activated. Fingers moved toward weapon controls, and then the aircraft did something no one in that tower had ever seen. It dropped its landing gear. The international signal for surrender, the aircraft was a MiG-15, and it was asking permission to land. What touched down on that runway changed the course of the Cold War. This is History Unclassified. Subscribe now. You need to hear this one. The Korean War had created the first jet versus jet battleground in history. American F-86 Sabres against Soviet-built MiG-15 SS, flown by North Korean, Chinese, and Soviet pilots. The kill ratio favored the Americans, but only just. The MiG-15 was a problem. U.S. Air Force intelligence had been trying to get a close look at one since the type first appeared over Korea on November 1st, 1950. The MiG-15 could climb faster than anything the Americans had in the air. Its ceiling exceeded the F-86 by several thousand feet. It was armed with two 23mm cannons and a single 37mm cannon. One burst from the 37mm could take apart a B-29 superfortress. Between November 1950 and the armistice of July 1953, MiG-15s had destroyed or damaged hundreds of UN aircraft. The Soviets had shared the technology with their allies, but they had shared almost nothing with the Americans. Every piece of intelligence the U.S. had on the MiG-15 had been gathered at a distance. Captured wreckage, crash site analysis, gun camera footage analyzed frame by frame, pilot debriefs after combat. None of it was enough. The Americans needed an intact aircraft, an aircraft they could take apart, measure, test, and fly themselves. In April 1953, the United States Air Force made a decision. If the MiG-15 could not be taken by force, it would be bought. The operation was given a code name, Operation MOOLAH, and the offer was extraordinary, $100,000 US. In 1953, $100,000 was not a sum. It was a life. It was more money than a communist bloc pilot would earn in 40 years. It came with full political asylum in the United States and a new identity. The offer was broadcast directly into communist airspace. Leaflets were dropped over North Korean and Chinese airfields. Radio transmissions carried the message in Korean, Chinese, and Russian. The U.S. Air Force was speaking directly to the men who flew the MiG-15. Step out of the communist world. Bring the aircraft, collect the money, start a new life. For 5 months, nothing happened. The offer sat in the air, unanswered and apparently ignored. American intelligence began to wonder whether any pilot would ever take the risk. Then, on the morning of September 21st, 1953, a single MiG-15 appeared on radar at Kimpo Air Base, and it was dropping its landing gear. His name was No Kum-sok. He was 21 years old. He was a lieutenant in the North Korean People's Air Force, and he had been planning this moment for longer than anyone knew. No Kum-sok had not heard the MOOLAH broadcast. He had not read the leaflets. He did not know about the $100,000. He was not defecting for the money. He was defecting because he had decided, alone and in silence, that he was done. Done with the regime. Done with the war. Done with a system that had conscripted him, trained him to kill, and expected him to die without question. On the morning of September 21st, 1953, No Kum-sok climbed into his MiG-15 bis at Sunan Airfield near Pyongyang. His assigned mission was a routine training flight. He filed a standard flight plan. He said nothing unusual to anyone. He took off at approximately 9:56 a.m. local time. Once airborne, he did not follow his assigned route. He turned south. He pushed the throttle to military power. He dropped to low altitude to avoid radar, and he flew straight for the American lines. The distance from Sunan to Kimpo Air Base is approximately 165 kilometers. At MiG-15 cruise speed, that is roughly 12 minutes of flying time. 12 minutes to cross the most heavily militarized border in the world. 12 minutes during which either side could have shot him down. 12 minutes during which everything could have gone wrong. He crossed the 38th parallel at low level. South Korean and American radar picked him up almost immediately. The alert went out. 2 F-86 Sabres were scrambled from Kimpo on an intercept vector. No Kum-sok did not know the scramble had been ordered. He did not know that American pilots were climbing into the same sky, cleared to fire if he did not comply. He reached Kimpo Air Base at approximately 10:05 a.m. He throttled back, he lowered his landing gear, and he came in on final approach to an American runway. The F-86s arrived 18 seconds after he touched down. On the ground, the reaction was immediate and controlled. Security teams moved to the aircraft. No Kum-sok was removed from the cockpit at gunpoint, which was standard procedure. He did not resist. He was taken to a secure facility and handed over to intelligence officers within the hour. His aircraft was intact, all systems functional, full fuel load partially expended, armament still aboard. The MiG-15 BIs that rolled to a stop at Kimpo on September 21, 1953, was the most valuable piece of aviation technology the United States had ever acquired from a hostile power, and almost no one was allowed to know it had landed. The operation was immediately classified. No Kum-sok's identity was protected. The aircraft was moved to a secure hangar, and a team of the most experienced aviation engineers in the U.S. military was quietly assembled and told to report to Kimpo without delay. What they were about to find inside that aircraft would rewrite everything American engineers thought they knew about Soviet aviation technology. And it would confirm something that the U.S. Air Force had suspected but never been able to prove. The MiG-15 was not the aircraft they had been fighting. It was considerably more dangerous. The engineering team arrived at Kimpo within 48 hours. They were led by Major Charles Chuck Yeager, the man who had broken the sound barrier on October 14, 1947, in the Bell X-1 over Muroc Dry Lake. Yeager was not there by accident. He was the most experienced high-performance jet pilot in the United States Air Force. If anyone could assess what the MiG-15 was truly capable of, it was him. The team spent 3 days on a preliminary inspection. They went over every system, every panel, every component, every wire and weld they could access without taking the aircraft apart. What they found surprised them. The MiG-15 BIS was not a crude copy of Western technology. It was a genuinely sophisticated aircraft. The airframe was lighter than expected. The engine was a reverse-engineered Rolls-Royce Nene turbojet, a design the British government had sold to the Soviet Union in 1946 in a decision that would become one of the most debated technology transfers of the Cold War. That engine produced 5,952 pounds of thrust in its Soviet version. It gave the MiG-15 a top speed of 668 miles per hour at altitude, a service ceiling of 50,853 feet, a rate of climb of 9,843 feet per minute. The F-86A Sabre, by comparison, had a top speed of 679 miles per hour and a service ceiling of 48,000 feet. The numbers were close, closer than American planners had publicly admitted. But the armament gap was real. The MiG-15 carried one 37mm and two 23mm cannons. The F-86 carried six 12.7mm Browning machine guns. In a single firing pass, the MiG-15 delivered almost 3 times the weight of fire. The team identified something else. The gun sight was less sophisticated than its American equivalent. The aircraft had known instability issues at transonic speeds near Mach 0.92. The controls became unpredictable in a high-speed dive. These were exploitable weaknesses, but the most significant finding was the one that could not be put in the initial report. The MiG-15 Biaz that No Kum-sok had flown to Kimpo was a late production variant. It had improvements that U.S. intelligence had not known existed. Updated hydraulics, a revised tail configuration, modified gun synchronization. American engineers had been developing counter-tactics against an aircraft that was already out of date. Yeager was cleared to fly the aircraft on October 5, 1953. 14 days after it had landed, he flew it for 30 minutes. He pushed it through its full performance envelope. He tested the instability at high speed. He tested the weapon systems. He tested the handling at low altitude where No Kum-sok had flown it on his approach to Kimpo. When he landed, his assessment went directly to Air Force headquarters in a classified report dated October 1953. The report identified 8 specific areas where American pilots could exploit MiG-15 vulnerabilities in air combat. It identified 3 areas where the MiG-15 held a genuine advantage over the F-86 that could not be countered by tactics alone. The report was classified secret. It was distributed to F-86 wing commanders throughout the Far East Air Forces within 2 weeks. Every American pilot flying against MiG-15s in any future conflict would fly with that knowledge. No Kum-sok never knew that the man who flew his aircraft had broken the sound barrier. He was already somewhere else entirely, being processed into a new life that the United States government had quietly arranged. No Kum-sok was taken to a secure debrief facility in Seoul within 24 hours of landing. The debrief lasted 11 days. His interrogators were not hostile. They were methodical. They asked him everything: the layout of Sunan Airfield, the location of fuel and ammunition storage at North Korean air bases, maintenance schedules, sortie rates, the number of Soviet advisors he had personally observed, their ranks, their roles, what they said and what they did not say. He answered everything. He confirmed what U.S. intelligence had long suspected but could not prove. Soviet pilots had flown combat missions over Korea under North Korean markings. They had been ordered to stay north of a line roughly parallel to Pyongyang to avoid being captured or identified. That order had not always been followed. He named specific Soviet officers he had encountered. He described their behavior, their operational authority, and the deference North Korean commanders showed them. The intelligence value of those 11 days went far beyond the aircraft. On October 1st, 1953, 10 days after landing, the United States government publicly acknowledged the defection. The announcement was deliberately managed. No Kum-sok's name was withheld initially. The aircraft was described as having been voluntarily delivered by a North Korean pilot seeking freedom in the West. The $100,000 was presented publicly as proof that Operation MOOLAH had succeeded. There was one problem with that narrative. No Kum-sok had not known about MOOLAH. He had not defected for the money. He had not seen the leaflets. He had not heard the broadcast. When intelligence officers first told him about the $100,000 offer, his response was recorded in the debrief transcript. He had not known. He was surprised. He asked whether he would still receive it. He would. The United States Air Force made the decision to pay him regardless. The money had been offered. The aircraft had been delivered. The conditions had been met. On October 26, 1953, No Kum-sok was publicly identified at a press conference in Tokyo. He stood before American and international journalists in civilian clothing. He was 21 years old. He looked like a student. He told the press he had defected because he believed in freedom. He said he had planned the defection for 2 years. He said he had chosen September 21st because it was a low-activity day at Sunan Airfield. The story ran worldwide. The U.S. Air Force had exactly what it had wanted from MOOLAH. Not just the aircraft. The image. A young communist pilot choosing the West. A MiG-15 sitting on an American runway. A check for $100,000 handed over in front of cameras. It was an intelligence victory and a propaganda victory at the same time. The aircraft was shipped to Okinawa in October 1953 for extended testing at Kadena Air Base. It was later transferred to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio for a full engineering assessment by the Air Technical Intelligence Center. The assessment produced a technical manual running to several hundred pages. It was distributed across U.S. Air Force commands, to Naval Aviation Intelligence, and to selected Allied Air Forces, the British, the Australians, the Canadians. Every Allied pilot who might face a MiG-15 in a future conflict now had access to its exact specifications, weaknesses, and exploitable handling characteristics. No Kum-sok was resettled in the United States under a protected identity. He enrolled at the University of Delaware. He later earned a degree in engineering. He became an American citizen. He lived quietly. He changed his name. He had arrived with nothing except the aircraft he had flown across the 38th parallel at low level on a Tuesday morning in September. He left with $100,000, a degree, a citizenship, and a life the North Korean regime had never intended him to have. The MiG-15 he delivered never flew under communist markings again, but the intelligence it produced would shape American air combat doctrine for the next decade, and the story of how it arrived was about to get more complicated. The MiG-15 that No Kum-sok delivered was not the last word on Operation MOOLAH. It was the beginning of a longer story. The technical assessment completed at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in late 1953 and early 1954 produced findings that fed directly into the development of the next generation of American fighter aircraft. The F-100 Super Sabre, the F-104 Starfighter, the F-105 Thunderchief. Each one designed with specific knowledge of what the MiG-15 could and could not do. Each one built to close the gaps that Yeager's October 1953 report had identified. The assessment also contributed directly to American air combat training doctrine. The dissimilar air combat training program, which would later become the foundation of the U.S. Navy Fighter Weapons School, known publicly as Top Gun, drew on exactly the kind of enemy aircraft performance data that No Kum-sok's MiG had provided. Understanding how the enemy aircraft actually flew, not how intelligence estimates said it flew, changed everything about how American pilots were trained to fight against it. Operation MOOLAH itself was assessed by the Air Force as a success on every measurable dimension. The aircraft was acquired intact. The pilot provided 11 days of high-value human intelligence. The propaganda value was immediate and global. The technical data was distributed to every relevant command within 90 days of the aircraft landing, and the cost was $100,000. For context, a single F-86 Sabre cost the United States government approximately $178,000 in 1953. The most valuable piece of enemy aviation intelligence of the Korean War era cost less than one of the aircraft it helped to counter. MOOLAH was formally declassified in stages beginning in the 1970s. The full operational details, including No Kum-sok's identity, his debrief transcripts, and Yeager's flight assessment report, were released progressively through the 1990s and 2000s. No Kum-sok eventually went public with his full story. He wrote a memoir published in 1996 under the title A MiG-15 to Freedom. He gave interviews. He appeared at aviation events. He became, in the late years of his life, a recognizable figure in the community of Cold War aviation history. He died in 2022 at the age of 90. A U.S. Air Force veteran would later say that No Kum-sok had done more for American air power in 12 minutes over the 38th parallel than most pilots accomplish in a full career. The MiG-15 he flew to Kimpo is preserved at the National Museum of the United States Air Force at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. It sits in the Korean War Gallery, intact, original markings partially visible. The same aircraft that rolled to a stop on an American runway on September 21, 1953. The story of Operation MOOLAH is not a story about defection. It is a story about what intelligence actually costs when it is done right. Not in lives, Not in years of classified operations, not in political risk. One offer, one pilot, one morning, $100,000, and one aircraft that landed on the right side of the line. The United States Air Force knew exactly what it needed. It found a way to get it that nobody in the communist bloc had thought to defend against. That is what makes this story worth telling. Not the money, not the aircraft, the fact that it worked. If this is the kind of history you want more of, subscribe to History Unclassified. Every video is built from the declassified record. No myths, no filler, just the real story. We will see you in the next one.